What I'd like to do now is to explore with the group the idea of Caritas, or charity, and social service and social action. To get us started in our exploration, I want to share two quotations with you. The first one comes from Archbishop Dom Helder Camara of Brazil.
When I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why they are poor, they call me a communist.
And for our second quotation, our Holy Father, Pope Francis. I encourage the financial experts and the political leaders of your countries to consider the words of St. John Chrysostom. Not to share one's goods with the poor is to rob them and deprive them of life. It is not our goods that we possess, but theirs. Let's think about those quotations for a minute. On the surface, they may not seem to have anything to do with charity. But if we reflect a little bit deeper, we can start to see the connections, especially as we unpack the ideas of social service and social action. If we think of a popular definition of the word charity, what would come to mind is probably generous acts carried out by individuals in which we share our goods, could be food, shelter, clothing, with those who are in need. We help them to meet their immediate needs through this generous act. The church, though, actually has two different concepts of charity. The first is that popular one that we think of, and this is called works of charity or social service. Works of charity are these generous acts by which we give to people in need. But the church also has an understanding of the word charity as a virtue. What do we mean by virtue? A virtue could be described simply as a firm and habitual disposition. And in this case, the virtue of charity, that firm and habitual disposition, is the virtue of love. Specifically, God's love. The word charity links to the word caritas. Caritas is God's love. Specifically, it is God's love which is received and given. So if caritas is God's love received and given, who can we look to as an example of that love? The answer, of course, is Jesus. So if we think about Jesus and Jesus' love for us, for the human family, what are some of the adjectives that we might use to describe that love? Let's take a minute now and make a list of all the adjectives that you as a group can come up with that describe the way Christ loved each and every one of us. Empowering, inclusive. These might have been some of the adjectives that you'll find on your list. You may not have, though, added doing justice, or if you did, good for you. To love as Christ loves means to do justice. We can look to Pope Benedict to help us understand what I'm saying here.
If we love others with charity, then first of all, we are just towards them. Not only is justice not extraneous to charity, not only is it not an alternative or parallel path to charity, justice is inseparable from charity and intrinsic to it. Justice is the primary way of charity, or in Paul VI's words, the minimum measure of it, an integral part of the love in deed and in truth,
to which St. John exhorts us. You see, justice flows from charity. It is not something, as the Pope says, that is apart from it or opposed to it. It actually flows from it. And this justice is when we get into the realm of social action. Through social action, we bring justice into the world, addressing the inequalities that exist in our economic systems, our social systems, and our political systems. And to do this, is actually to express Caritas, to express the Christian virtue of love of God received, given, and shared. So justice as part of the virtue of charity or Caritas is not simply a theological argument, but it's also a logical one. If you think about it, we can't create the kind of world that God wants for us without addressing the root causes of the poverty and injustice that exist in the first place. So it's a logical argument. We only need to think of the example of the river baby story to illustrate what we mean by this. The story goes simply like this. A person comes upon a river and they see a baby floating down the river, helpless. So they dive in and they save the baby. They bring the baby out, they're drying. Just as they're wondering what to do with this baby they've saved, they see another baby coming down the river. So they put the first baby down, they dive in, they save the second baby, they pull that baby out. And then there's another baby, so they call their friends. And pretty soon they've got a great operation running and they're raising money to help save all these babies that are flowing down the river, and they're pulling babies out of the river by the minute. That pulling those babies out of the river, that's an important work of charity or social service. But at the same time, for that act to truly be Caritas, or addressing that situation in the spirit of Caritas, what also has to be done? Eventually somebody clues in and they say, what has to be done is we have to go up the river and we have to find out why the babies are coming down the river in the first place, and we have to stop that. That is the work of justice, and it's an integral part of addressing that situation, the river baby situation. And so in that simple example, we can see how works of charity and works of justice are both intrinsic to the concept of Caritas and addressing social problems in that spirit of Caritas, with the virtue of Caritas. Welfare projects, which meet certain urgent needs, should be considered merely temporary responses as long as the problems of the poor are not radically resolved by rejecting the absolute autonomy of markets and financial speculation and by attacking the structural causes of inequality. No solution will be found for the world's problems, or for that matter, any problems. Inequality is the root of all social ills. So justice requires harmonious relationships, not only between individuals, but even between whole societies, in order to promote the common good. These harmonious relationships promote the common good in the community on our street, like our neighborhood, or in our ward, in our city neighborhood, or in our province, our country, and even between countries. So it's not just a relationship between individuals, but indeed even a relationship between whole societies that promotes a common good. This is the requirement of justice. And these relationships are designed in promoting the common good to uphold human dignity. This key principle of human dignity is the value from which all the concepts of Caritas flows. It is the value in which we say that no matter what, each and every one of us possesses a dignity given to us by virtue of being made in the image of God that can never be taken away. And because of that, no matter what or where somebody lives, we have to promote justice in our relationships with them. All 7 billion people that we share the planet with. It is a well-known fact that current levels of production are sufficient, yet millions of people are still suffering and dying of starvation. This, dear friends, is truly scandalous. A way has to be found to enable everyone to benefit from the fruits of the earth, and not simply to close the gap between the affluent and those who must be satisfied with the crumbs falling from the table, but above all to satisfy the demands of justice, fairness, and respect for every human being. And so, my friends, it's very simple. In order to truly cultivate the virtue of charity, Caritas, within us, we must deepen our understanding of the word beyond its simple definition of generous acts. We must see the totality of this idea of what it means to receive and share God's love with our brothers and sisters all around the world. We need both things. We need to draw from the idea of Caritas that we are called to works of charity and we are called to works of justice. They both go together in living a truly Christian life. Truly, the church's social mission is to have these 2 feet working and walking side by side, both works of charity and works of justice.
The church can never be exempted from practicing charity as an organized activity of believers. And on the other hand, there will never be a situation where the charity of each individual Christian is unnecessary, because in addition to justice, man needs and will always need love.
Now, you may be wondering, okay, so what's the role of the church and the government in all of this? The church as an institution respects the separation of church and state. The role of the government, of the state, is to promote order within the society. Indeed, that's the aim of all politics. The church's role, however, is to show what the requirements of justice within that society are. The church is to be the beacon to which we can look to for the values that help to inform and judge whether the government is doing the proper job in ensuring the good order of society. Reflection on the church's teachings with respect to Caritas can help to deepen our analysis of whether the authentic requirements of justice are being met within a society. And this is the proper role of the church in this question of Caritas. Now, if that's the church as an institution, what about us as citizens who are both, live as citizens under the governance of a state, but also are members of Christ's family, members of the church? The direct duty to work for a just ordering of society, on the other hand, is proper to the lay faithful. As citizens of the state, they are called to take part in public life in a personal capacity, so they cannot relinquish their participation in the many different economic, social, legislative, administrative, and cultural areas, which are intended to promote organically and institutionally the common good. The mission of the faithful is therefore to configure social life correctly, respecting its legitimate autonomy and cooperating with other citizens according to their respective competences and fulfilling their own responsibility. Even if the specific expressions of ecclesial charity can never be confused with the activity of the state, it still remains true that charity must animate the entire lives of the lay faithful and therefore also their political activity lived as solidarity. Another person who can provide guidance for us is St. John Paul II in terms of how do we promote justice within these structures of society. This is what he said.
Love for others, and in the first place, love for the poor, in whom the church sees Christ himself, is made concrete in the promotion of justice. It is not merely a question of giving from one's surplus, but of helping entire peoples presently excluded or marginalized to enter into the sphere of economic and human development. For this to happen, it is not enough to draw on the surplus goods, which in fact our world abundantly produces. It requires, above all, a change of lifestyles, of models of production and consumption, and of the established structures of power which today govern societies. Nor it is a matter of eliminating instruments of social organization which have proved useful, but rather of orienting them to an adequate notion of the common good in relation to the whole human family.
So, what we can draw from this is that in order to put our faith into practice, in order to truly be able to say we are Christians who have received and are sharing God's love, sharing Caritas, we need to be engaged in both works of charity and works of justice. These works of charity, social service, model Christ's love directly for the poor or for those in need at their time of greatest distress in the moment. And our works of justice help us to ensure that our society is ordered in such a way that it reflects our gospel values. Values like respecting the human dignity of each and every one of us. And these two things together, this practice of Caritas, of both the social service and the social action, also are expressed and done in such a way that respect the authentic human development that each and every person is called to by virtue of being a child of God. Each and every one of us is called to develop our true potential, not only economically, but also socially, spiritually, and even ecologically. And for this reason, the church speaks of an integral human development. Integral human development is not only the development of the economic sphere, but also thinking of development as both the social, spiritual, and ecological dimensions of human flourishing. Usually when we think of development, we simply think of the economic sphere. If you were to close your eyes and say, okay, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of international development? Chances are what you're going to think of is something like digging a well, or building a school, or building a roads, or setting up a factory to give people jobs. In other words, all things that help to stimulate economic productivity. We don't think necessarily of things like the development of just institutions that, for example, do things like ensure a minimum wage as being a development, or something as the development of social safety nets, or the development of freedom of conscience, freedom of religion within societies. But these are all important aspects of development and of building a truly global common good. So it's not just about rich countries, industrialized countries giving money so that other countries can build the same kinds of buildings and roads and that they have. It's about truly looking at an authentic human integral development of our societies. And how do we do that? How do we create this kind of authentic integral human development? Well, we do it through relationships. By creating relationships between peoples that are harmonious and promote the common good, we build a true global solidarity. We as Development and Peace see relationships as essential in building the kind of world that we want with our brothers and sisters throughout the global south. What does this mean? Well, what this means is that we work primarily in partnerships with local peoples. Rather than us sending a whole group of engineers or doctors or other professionals to a country to run a project because we've decided this is what people need. Instead, we find local groups of people who live in those countries, who are born in those countries, and who have a vision for overcoming the poverty and obstacles to development that they face. We always say that the people of the global south have to be the masters of their own development and direct their own development. Authentic human development has to originate with the person as a subject. We have to look at people as subjects and not objects of development. The people who are suffering in the world, the most marginalized, they are not objects. They are people. And so we have to form relationships that help to promote their authentic development as directed by themselves. And this is what we try and do. And we as Development and Peace, in building these relationships through the countries of Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East, then share these relationships with you. Our education and advocacy campaigns every year come from our experience of these relationships that we share in these campaigns. All our fundraising that we do comes from these relationships. Our trips, when Canadians go overseas with Development and Peace, we call them solidarity trips. And they're not trips where we're going to build a school for people or dig a well for them. They're trips where we go and we meet our partners and we meet the communities that they work with, and we hear about what they are able to accomplish themselves with our financial support and accompaniment. And that's how we build a true international solidarity. That's how we cultivate this sense of Caritas that calls us to do both works of charity and works of justice to build the world that God wants for each and every one.